but it's not the right application of silt fence to be in concentrated flow. All right, so that's it for me. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he's going to go over small site discussion.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, first I'm going to go through just briefly the CGP and the Santa Ana MS4 permit requirements. So, construction general permit, most of you know most of this. Permit took effect on July 1st, 2010. It covers sites that are greater than 1 acre. It is a risk-based permit, and that's based on sediment and receiving water risks. There are training requirements. Some of you have taken the QSD, QSP course. And then in 2012, they did amend the permit to remove the numeric effluent limits and also the receiving water monitoring. So as far as the risk categories, there are 3 categories, levels 1, 2, and 3, escalating in order, and they are based on a combination of your sediment risk and your receiving water risk. So for risk level 1, and all risks are determined via Appendix 1 of the permit, and then the risk level 1 requirements are in Attachment C. There are no numeric action levels for risk level 1, and basically what you're looking at are primarily housekeeping BMPs for risk level 1. Everything from stockpile materials, chemical storage, covered waste containers. Most of the information that Scott went through are required as part of risk level 1 for the risk level 1 sites. Now, as far as inspections, they have to be done by a qualified SWIP practitioner. They have to be documented, and they're to take place on a weekly basis and also during, before, and after rain events. They're to take place outside of business hours, and there's also a quarterly non-stormwater inspection. And then if there are deficient BMPs identified through inspections of the site, those fixes have to be in place within 72 hours. And again, there's no rain event action plan for the risk level 1 sites. For risk level 2 and 3 requirements, you do have the numeric action levels. You have the pH and turbidity. There is the requirement of the rain event action plans for all phases of construction. And they have to be implemented or have to be developed 48 hours prior to a rain event and implemented on site 24 hours prior to a rain event. There's other requirements like soil cover for inactive areas. There's requirements for sediment controls at the top and toe and face of slopes. There's the requirement to limit traffic to all designated entrances and exits. This is really good rule of thumb for any construction site. And then they're also required to inspect access to roads for daily track out. There is sampling associated with the risk level 2 and 3 sites, and when it is raining, you're sampling 3 times a day. You're sampling for pH and turbidity, and you're trying to characterize the worst discharges from your site, so characterizing all disturbed areas. There's no requirement to sample if it is dangerous or it's outside of business hours. And then you're also sampling any non-stormwater discharges that discharge off the site. If there is an exceedance of the NALs, then you submit to the state board within 10 days for risk level 2 and within 5 days for risk level 3 sites. And you also have to identify what the fixes are to the BMPs to get out of, or to make sure that you're not triggering the NALs any further. So some other information on the CGP, there is the QSD, QSP training. That is provided by authorized trainers of record by CASCA. For the qualified SWIP developers, it's 24 hours of training, and the qualified SWIP practitioners, there's 16 hours of training. The county has offered this in the past, and the plan is to offer another course early next year. More information can be found at the State Water Resources Control Board website on the CGP. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific requirements of the MS4 permit, the Santa Ana region permit. So for municipal inspection of construction sites, there's a variety of different requirements. So the first one is that the construction activities that go on within a municipality have to be consistent with the model construction runoff program. The city also has to maintain an updated inventory of all construction sites within the city's jurisdiction, and for those sites that have building and grading permits. There's a requirement to prioritize construction sites as high, medium, and low threat to water quality. And then when you're conducting your inspections, you are limited to consistency with California and United States Constitution, compliance with your erosion and sediment control ordinances, the model construction program in Orange County, and the Orange County Construction Runoff Guidance Manual. So those are your guides. As far as the checklist for inspections goes, you have to verify if a site is greater than 1 acre that they have coverage under the construction general permit, that they have a erosion and sediment control plan and you've reviewed it and you've documented that you've reviewed it. You're also observing for non-stormwater discharges and any potential pollutant sources on a construction site. You also want to make sure that the site is in compliance with any ordinances that you have, the MS4 permit, WQMPs, and the construction runoff guidance manual. And then you're also looking and assessing all the different BMPs on site to see if they are actually implemented correctly. As far as frequencies of inspection goes, during the dry season, your frequency is sufficient to control the sediment and other pollutants and non-stormwater, so that is determined on your own basis. And then during the wet season, based on those priorities that were set, your high priority sites you're inspecting once per month, your medium priority sites twice per month, and your low priority sites once per the wet season. There also has to be consistent enforcement for non-compliant sites. And that enforcement includes enforcement based on the permit and your ordinances. There's a requirement to modify the local implementation plans to identify the enforcement linkage with the regional board. When do you get the regional board involved on those most recalcitrant sites? And then your sanctions also have to include a written enforcement order at the time of inspection, and then any other appropriate actions in making sure that they comply. There's also requirements to notify the regional board. You're going to notify within 24 hours if there is an imminent threat to human health or the environment, and then for any other situations, you're going to notify within 5 days. You also have to be able to respond to third-party complaints. If you get a citizen that's calling you up and saying, hey, there's a discharge of sediment or sediment-laden water from a construction site, you have to respond within a timely manner. And then there's also training for inspectors, and that's part of what we're doing here today. Okay, Jennifer mentioned the Construction Runoff Guidance Manual. The idea with this manual was to provide useful and succinct information for contractors to essentially control pollutants discharges from construction sites. The document incorporates all the different water quality requirements for both the San Diego and the Santa Ana region. It incorporates all the different BMPs that we talked about here. It's consistent with CASCA's construction runoff manual, and it's available here at ocwatersheds.com. So now I'm going to go through the small sites and then do a similar interactive exercise. So the idea with the small sites, a couple years ago we heard from all of you that this is the majority of sites that you're going out to inspect. It's not the big, large acre sites, but it's really the smaller, urban, single-family construction sites. And so what we did is we focused this part of the presentation on some of the things that you should be looking for on those on the smaller sites. And we added a bunch of new information this year so that you could get a better idea of what you should be doing and looking for on the smaller sites. So these are all the different elements. I'm going to go through them all in detail. So the first thing is perimeter controls. Obviously, on the smaller sites, you want to make sure that you either have gravel bag silt fences or straw wattles, making sure that the site is clearly delineated, especially critical in the ultra-urban and single-family residential situations. And it's important to understand where those limits are. It also helps by putting these barriers up to make sure that any vehicles going in and out of the construction site are using the proper entrances and exits, and you're not running over the perimeter controls as well. The other part of this is spill controls. This should be one of the first things that you look at on a construction site. Ask, where's your spill control kit? This is a requirement. They need to have this on site. Spill kits can be cheap, they can be expensive, but all the stuff that's in them is easily obtainable. And even on the smaller sites, you can have significant discharges of different types of liquids on a site. And so the construction sites need to make sure that they have these materials on site. In addition to that, I would recommend a wet dry vacuum and other absorbent materials. So as far as tracking controls and curb inlet protection, so all entrances and exits should have coarse gravel or a steel shaker plate. So the idea here is that you want a defined entrance. Even on the smaller sites, even if it's pedestrian laden, you need to have a defined entrance. I'm not saying you have to have a shaker plate at a pedestrian entrance, but you need to have some kind of control, gravel or soap, or maybe even carpet, to make sure that there's no track out from that pedestrian control. Obviously, if there's vehicle entrance and exits, you want to make sure that those are properly controlled with the coarse gravel and the steel shaker plate. All the entrances also should really be cleaned up on a daily basis, and you should encourage the construction sites that you're inspecting to do this, making sure that anything is cleaned up really every day. And then curb inlet protection is a little bit different on the smaller sites. For the vast majority of the smaller sites, you're not going to have inlets on the site themselves, but they're going to be in the street, down the street from the construction site. It could be out of sight from the construction site. That doesn't mean that they don't need to protect that inlet. So making sure that, one, you're inspecting that those downstream inlets are protected, and if they're not, coordinating with the construction site to make sure that they're putting the proper controls. So for materials and liquid storage, the idea here is that you need to have all materials and liquid covered and in stored containers if possible. The best case scenarios that we've seen for the small single family construction sites is that as they're constructing the downstairs, that they're storing the materials within the house itself. In an ultra urban situation, if that's not possible, a shipping container is a really good use for storing materials. It's also lockable, so you can prevent any theft of any of the materials on site. For the other materials, you want to make sure that they've covered them to prevent wind erosion, that they're up on pallets so that there's no potential for stormwater to come in contact with them. And then for the liquid storage, all of these, how many construction sites do we see where there's just paint buckets around, there's different types of liquids and so forth? All of these type of things really need to be kept in a specified container that's designed for these things. The picture on the right that you'll see there really is designed as a self-contained unit. It's lockable. It has secondary containment integrated in it. It's not that expensive. So those type of systems are out there and should be used on construction sites. As far as dirt and grading goes, there's going to be stockpiles at every construction site. It's just a matter of how often those stockpiles are used. And if they're not being used, they really need to be covered and stored on site. They should be covered, after activities during the day anyway. The best case scenario is to put those stockpiles inside your perimeter controls. The picture of the one here isn't inside the perimeter controls, but it is have a tarp on it, and it does have the sandbag barrier around it. So we know that there's consistently stockpiles of materials at construction sites. Encourage them to have extra tarps and extra gravel bags that are kept on site so that if they get more stockpiles of materials, they can immediately have the right controls upon them. And then even for the smaller sites, dust control is a requirement. This can be as simple as having one of the construction workers get out there and spray when needed, making sure that there's no non-stormwater discharges. And then there's even systems that can be attached to the back of a pickup truck that can be used for dust control. As far as equipment goes, storage of the equipment is the same principle. You should try to encourage them to store their equipment within their perimeter controls. That's not always feasible, especially in the ultra-urban construction sites, but at a minimum, they should have the drip pans associated with them. There's a lot of different products out on the market now as far as drip pans go that have absorbent materials within them. You'll see as the second picture from the top there. There's even these really small ones for the ultra small equipment that have little berms in them and are really good to be able to implement on the smaller construction sites. As far as the dumpsters, all dumpsters should be covered. That should just be standard operating procedure. We don't see it, but all dumpster companies now have the covers available. For the smaller sites, you want to use the smaller dumpsters. The benefit there is that you can actually lock them. I know there's a lot of issues with dumping on construction sites, and if they're locked, then they'll be less likely to provide dumping or opportunities for dumping at those sites. And then, of course, on the portable toilets, I think pretty much now all the portable toilets come with the secondary containment, the trays underneath them, but making sure that those toilets do have that, and whatever facility that they're using to rent them should be able to provide those trays. Okay, washout areas. So this is for the disposal of wet construction materials. The idea with these washout areas is that they have to be watertight. There's everything from the really high-end materials, everything down to even a kiddie pool that can work in certain situations. The example here, they should really have a tarp under it, but it does work. And so there's a lot of different products out there. We even saw a product yesterday in the training where it was essentially a plastic bag in a cardboard box, and it works. So there's a lot of cheap opportunities or cheap materials out there that can work. You want to make sure that when they're cleaning the concrete waste and the wet construction materials, that they're not getting any residue into the street or gutter, and if they do, to make sure that that's cleaned up in an appropriate manner. And then also making sure that there is proper disposal of the dried washout material. That should be placed in the appropriate waste receptacles. As far as the concrete trucks and pumpers, really most of the time these are operating outside of the perimeter controls, and so they need to have perimeter controls themselves. They need to be done with tarps placed underneath them during operation. And then any residual that comes about has to be cleaned up. So this goes from the large pumping trucks to normal concrete trucks to even the small little concrete mixers. Everything should be done on top of a tarp. And then obviously using the washout areas for proper cleanup. So this is an example of an individual lot erosion control plan. And it really exemplifies what can be done in a proper layout of erosion control plan on site. You can see the perimeter controls. You can see the prevention of run-on from an adjacent site. You see the stockpiled materials. You see the proper track out and entrance controls and so forth. And it really shows you that even on the small sites, all of these things can be done and you can still have an active and functioning construction site. This is a trifold handout that is provided by the City of San Clemente that essentially incorporates everything I just discussed, but in an easy pamphlet that can be handed out to contractors so that they understand, hey, these are the basic things that I need to understand. It's in cartoon format. It really just provides a reminder to people on what they should be doing. I know other cities use this to hand out to people. And it's a good idea to think about for your particular cities of developing something similar yourself. So now I'm going to go through the small sites interactive assessment. And I'm going to ask you to identify to me what are some of the issues with small site case number 1. And just shout it out and I'll repeat it in the microphone. So what do you guys think? What's wrong here? Perimeter, right. No perimeter controls. What else? That's right. So there's no defined, really no defined entrance. It's kind of hard to see. They have the porta potty inside the garage, which is good, and it looks like it has secondary containment. But you have a stockpile, and that stockpile is being tracked out. There's also gravel bags, but it's kind of hard to see. There's some cement bags that are kind of spilling out into the gutter. So that's a big no-no. Okay, this is my new favorite photo. I just took this a couple weeks ago. It's out on a construction site, and there's kind of a lot of wrong things going on here. I'd say there's probably at least 4, and then kind of a big overarching issue. So what do you guys think? What's wrong here? perimeter, no tarp, trash, right? Stockpile. That's right, porta potties by the street. So the most interesting thing that I found here is that there's some cement residue right on what looks like, yep, those are pervious pavers. Well, guess what? They're not pervious anymore. So this is an example of a developer that spent a lot of money incorporating a post-construction control that has essentially been nullified by poor construction practices. What's wrong here? Can anyone call for a dumpster, please? Exactly. Okay. What's going on here? Everything, right? Well, that's true. We see a lot of trash. We see a paint can, right? That has the potential to discharge pollutants. It's kind of hard to see, but again, cement residue all over the place. No perimeter controls. And again, they're clogging the porous pavers here with the cement residue. This looks pretty good, right? What's wrong here? That's right. A green fence is not a perimeter control. We all know that. There's no controls here whatsoever. And if you look way down at the back there, there's a discharge. And that's a discharge of sediment or cement-laden water with some stucco operations as well. What about here? Yep. Again, green fence is not a perimeter control, so definitely gravel bags. What else? No secondary containment on the porta potty, and it's pretty close to your perimeter control, so that's not a good place for it. What about in the foreground? Just trash, and it looks like some kind of liquid materials there, right? So, all in all, they've got some work to do. This one's a little harder to see, but can you see the shadow on the other side of the green fence? What's there? Stockpile. An uncontrolled stockpile that, when it rains, that material is going right into what? An unprotected catch basin. Okay, this one's a pretty interesting one. You can actually see the receiving water in the background there. This is literally right on the beach. House right on the beach. What's going on here? You can get an idea of what's going on. That's right. Perimeter, trash. There's some concrete operations. It's pretty close to. This is down in Emerald Bay to a pristine and close to an ASBS water body. Okay, what would you do differently on this particular site? Just simple, easy fix here that would change the whole dynamic here. Sweep it up is a good option, but I would have a perimeter around this, right? People are walking through this, tracking sediment all over the place. There's trash. This is an active parking lot, but this part of the parking lot shouldn't be active during construction. This I took a couple years ago, but still one of my favorites because there's so much wrong here. And this is right near the beach. Like I would say 100 feet away from the beach. What's the problem here? That's right. So that's actually a catch basin there, believe it or not. So that's issue number one. What's right next to the catch basin? Stockpile, right. And then you see those bags over on the left? What do you think those are? Cement bags that are leaking out right next to the catch basin. And then in the front, what do we have? No perimeter controls. So again, this is a bad actor. What's wrong here? Looks pretty good, right? That's right. That's right. No no maintenance here. They got the right idea. The rock's probably a little too small anyway, but this is serving no purpose at all. The tracking plate has become non-effective. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to our next speaker. So let me... Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. And actually, in previous years, we did kind of a good and bad comparison. But yeah, that's a great idea for sure. Okay, now we're going to have Jay Denny with the City of Irvine, and he is going to give the city perspective. All right, Jay, it's all you.
Thanks for coming. My name's Jay Denny. I work for the City of Irvine. I am a senior structural inspector for the city, and we are tasked with the day-to-day check on construction sites for their SWEPS plans and making sure they're in compliance. We do have grading in the city also, and they do check, but they're not on site as frequent as the building inspectors. So we're out there more often, have more contact with the job site, and are able to help the contractor comply with the requirements. Let's talk about compliance. I'm going to need some help up here. I'd like to call up Todd Coram, and I'd like to call up Monty Tellis. I'm kidding, guys. I'm kidding, guys. Both of them were getting up and doing it, and they were going to make it happen. One of the keys to helping your contractors get to where they need to be with minimum compliance is communication. And part of that is not surprising them. If I would have communicated with Todd and Monty and say, hey, I'm going to need your guys' help and I'm going to have you come up, that would have been a lot better than putting them on the spot and letting them, right there, they're both like, what, how am I going to do this, And you don't want to surprise them. So communicate with them. And when does that start? Early on. We have a pre-con system in the city of Irvine that we utilize. And it's great. It gives them all kinds of information. It's a lot of information for them, but it covers it really well and gives them a format on how to get through the construction process. And that's in that pre-con we talk about their pollution prevention program and make sure that we touch on it then. And then it's a constant, keep talking to them about it as you're going out to the job site. That communication for your pollution prevention is going to devise a plan. It's based on your SWEPS plan for the project and making sure that the BMPs that they have are installed properly. We've seen slides already of silt fence in waterways with high volume doesn't work. So straw wattle zigzagged across your entrance, that's not going to take the place of a rumble plate. We got to get the proper items in the proper places installed properly, so they can comply. And if you let them know what you're expecting from the get-go, it'll be a lot easier for them and for you, because all this does equal dollars, and they're always watching the dollars and they're always watching the schedule. So it's key to helping them also maintain when you're helping them with their compliance and getting their minimums. It's easier to maintain. I'm going to talk a little bit about entrances and exits. Some of the basics, 3-inch stone, 12 inches deep, over filter fabric, 50 feet long, 30 feet wide, rumble racks. A good tie-in to perimeter control. We've already seen that in slides where there's no tie-in. There's just a big opening on either side of it because for whatever reason. So that's something that as you're going to the job site and making your visits for other inspections, letting them know, hey, you need to get that tuned up, tighten it up so we don't have a problem with a vent causing, discharge into the street and them not complying. Some additional items, and these aren't maybe required for, pollution prevention, but they'll definitely help. Gates, you're going to see gates at the entrances, so people going into the job site after a rain event and doing roadies with their trucks and then driving out, and you got track out all over the place with locks on the gates also help. Illumination at that gate with site contact info. is key too. If something's going on the job site and it's not someone who sees a problem can't contact anybody to let them know what's going on. These are some items, like I said, that may not be a requirement but are definitely helpful. These are included in our pre-con